Do you want to spend your time personally as a person? Do you want to spend your time building out interesting product? Or do you want to spend time with the GRC team creating screenshots? The phrase compliance automation is a bit misleading in the sense it should be kind of broken down into what is kind of true compliance automation and what is kind of automation of compliance workflows, right? Represented in terms of bulldozers, that if your production line went down over this much time, here is the number of bulldozers that would get impacted. This is how your production line would slow down.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the GRC Engineering Podcast. I'm super excited about the guest I have with me today, Vic Bhatia. I wanted to present Vic real quick and also let him the opportunity to present himself in a bit more detail. So Vic has been working in the security industry for over a decade. He has experience across numerous companies, including Meta and Marqeta. And he's now managing his own company, Compliance Foundry. Across his breadth of experience, he managed GRC programs for numerous industries across SaaS and financial services. I'm very glad to have him with me today because I think he has a very unique point of view on this industry, and he can really help us shed light on some of the specific challenges the GRC engineering space will face in the upcoming future. Glad to have you today.
Glad to be here, Ayub. Thanks for having me.
No worries, no worries. So to get started, something I ask all of my guests is we want to learn a lot more about you, right? We want to know more about what has been your journey in security overall, but also how it all related to GRC. What is kind of your genesis story around GRC?
My genesis story is a painful one, and I just get. So I've been in this industry for about 20 plus years now. Started out as a CISO at Motorola. Started responding to a data breach. Spent 3 years of my life in a plane dealing with regulators all over the world. Long story short, career evolved. I was asked to look at Meta's third-party risk management program after Cambridge Analytica had happened. My mandate was, go find out how many other Cambridge type vendors exist, and don't burn any holes, don't burn any bridges, right? That evolved into me coming in as the head of security GRC at Meta FinTech. So basically, any financial instrument on any Meta surface, right? We launched Novi and Libra, the cryptocurrency project that we had. Moved on to Marqeta, where I was the director of security engineering, setting up a bit of compliance engineering over there as well. Realized that while I love auditors, I really hate dealing with audits. And the engineer part of me was kind of really frustrated with that. I'm like, there has to be something, there have to be like sufficient design patterns out there where we can kind of start, making this stuff a bit more, bit more automated, a bit more efficient, a bit better, user experience. So that has led me to start my own startup. It's called Compliance Foundry. We are basically building out the next generation GRC platform. The idea is to have automated compliance in the cloud. The MVP we're coming up with is going to be around automated SOC 2 compliance in AWS. Okay,
very interesting. So if I picked up right, like, do you come from an engineering background?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did.
Okay, so that's interesting because so when I spoke with Charles, he was telling me he came from detection engineering and reverse malware engineering. And I always like, people that come from different industries, let's say not traditional Big Four auditing.
Yeah.
I think they always bring a different lens, and often they see some of the limits that some of the practitioners are a bit more heads down. They don't see as quickly.
That's true. I kind of earlier on had this light bulb moment in my career. I mean, we kind of lump GRC together, right? Governance, risk, compliance.
Yeah.
I started kind of thinking it a bit more, vertically instead of horizontally. So in my mind, so compliance was at the bottom of the pyramid, and then risk, and then governance, with the idea being that compliance is ultimately this kind of quality control function.
Mhm.
It tells you the minimum you have to do in order to, have a decent amount of quality control, right? And then risk kind of layers on top of it. Now that how your quality is, what are the risks that face your business, and then governance is at the very top. That, hey, now that you know what the risks are, how do you govern and manage your enterprise, right? But yeah, I mean, everybody has a different kind of point of view depending on how they get into the industry, right? So
No, definitely, definitely. I think that's this breadth of experience coming into GRC that really kind of helps all of us move forward. So
yeah.
that's always a good thing. So you already touched on a couple of potential limits, but I wanted to have like your kind of your take on some of the, like, in your experience, especially now that you moved out of industry and you kind of building your own solution. Like, what are some of the major limits you saw in the way like GRC activities were performed, especially in compliance, because I think that's where you focus a lot more.
Yeah. So I feel like compliance started out from a very good intent, but the execution has become very manual and very constrained. So instead of, compliance being a key enabler, that, hey, like I said, how good or bad is quality control of our practices, right? Compliance has kind of become the be all and all.
Yeah.
The two kind of challenges that I've seen personally, sitting at the intersection of, dealing with compliance and, being an engineer myself, is that regulators are not engineers, right? And engineers, for the most part, don't understand compliance. Not they should, right? So it becomes one of those things that instead of being viewed positively, it's like, oh my God, what do I need to do now so we can pass these audits and move on to the next thing, right?
Yeah.
It becomes, very, very screenshot driven. It becomes, engineers having to step away and, perform toil for all the compliance, engineering type activities.
Yes.
So yeah.
So yeah, so that's, so for you, there's an issue in like translation, right? I think there's like two different words that are not communicating maybe enough. And so like the kind of context like a compliance professional needs is very, very different to the kind of context the engineering, like an engineering team uses on day to day. So you have to pull them completely out of the way they work for one specific activity. So that was one of the challenges you saw as a practitioner. Do you have something else as well that you've seen across your experience?
So what I feel is that most leaders today, they do want to do the right activities, right? Nobody wants to, come to the job and say that, hey, I was, barely adequate today, right? But at the same time, most people are not able to kind of get beyond compliance, right? Again, I'm talking about, industries that are, regulated, PCI, HIPAA, SOC, whatever, right? So compliance has kind of become the be all do all. There's a lot of talk these days, validly so, around the CSOs having some kind of, board representation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or we saw with the recent, the SEC lawsuits where, the CISOs are being held personally liable
Yeah.
for some of these activities, right? But at the same time, think about this as a CISO, right? You are stepping into an organization as a new leader, right? You don't really have an idea of how much technical debt you have. There is really no good way to understand, how good or bad your quality control practices are. And now at the same time, you're being said that, hey, guess what, buddy, you're being held liable for all of this stuff now, right? So,
Yeah.
so I see some of these challenges. Again, there is some good activity happening. I'm not going to name any vendors here, but there are some good vendors out here which are automating some of the business workflows to increase some of the visibility.
Yeah.
But I feel like we as an industry can still do a lot more to mature the GRC practices themselves, right?
Yeah. So like you highlighted a lot of issues around like how the data is available to leadership, right? Because like, of course, it feels weird of saying like someone could take personal liability for something they don't even know exists, right? Because they don't have the right data to action on it.
Yeah.
So I think, of course, like because GRC like is kind of a broad spectrum, like they work with so many different stakeholders. Like it makes sense that if they really like leverage all that information and made it available to leadership in a repeatable and like scalable way, not just like sharing screenshots, meaning
Yeah.
like potentially dashboarding and stuff that would be like readily available for leadership, like then decision would be made with a lot more information, and then you would know in practice which risks you're taking, because if you don't know
Yeah.
which risks you're taking, then you're liable for them, then it's a bit challenging.
Absolutely. I mean, like any organization that I've seen. So I used to be a consultant, I've been an industry operator consultant, all the good stuff, right?
Mhm.
Any organization that I've worked with, I have not seen a single risk management register that is at least any less than a couple of hundred lines in a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
That at least has, issues that have missed, call it SLOs, SLAs, whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So now, I mean, so these used to be kind of known issues, these could used to be represented as, technical debt. But now the whole element of jeopardy has been introduced in the picture that, hey, the SEC is coming after you, that these were known issues.
Yeah.
You knew about this for years and years and years, yet how come nothing happened about it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I understand. And I think on this, I think it's a broader like security issue. I think like often the security team doesn't always have the best reputation with the engineering department, right? In terms of like always pushing, always focusing on like, like firefighting, right? Like if we don't fix this today, like everything's doomed, etc. And I think it at some point like it gets a bit annoying, I think, because like you can't really hierarchize the potential remediations if everything is critical,
Yeah.
because there's always holes, right? Because like you can't be secure, you're always on the path to being more secure. So I think it's challenging when it's more of a recording activity, like you have endless lists of issues and risks and like triage vulnerabilities that are sitting there for years and years, but then when an issue happens, like you knew about it, but like knowing is a very vague term in this context, just because like you can scan your environment and know everything that is wrong in it, but then there's like power play and the actual like office politics context where you need to prioritize what can be done and you have limited budget, and I think GRC in this context can help a lot, right? Because especially if you build from that baseline and you move towards like a like risk-based approach, then you can say like we actually assess that these ones were low risk, but low risk is not zero risk, right? It could happen through that door, but it doesn't mean we didn't do all of the due diligence beforehand. So it helps you make potentially cases. Hopefully it never gets to the SEC knocking on your door, but at least you have like some rationale to defend your approach.
Right. So today's December 1st. We recently had Charlie Munger, who was the business partner for Warren Buffett, pass away, right?
Yeah.
So the Financial Times had a list of like his 100 kind of top, aphorisms or sayings or whatever, right? And one of them that kind of caught my eye, which I think is relevant to this conversation, the point you just made, is Charlie said, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is relevant. You talked a bit about the heartburn between the engineering teams and the security teams, right? So, most engineering teams have a very significant backlog, right? There is this whole onus that, okay, we need to enable the business, we need to, push out product, right?
Yes.
And pushing out, product is counted as, impact to the company, right? And these pushes usually happen in like engineering sprints, which happen over a quarter. So you have 3 months basically to demonstrate the impact that you're providing the company, and that results in promotions, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Now security is always considered a business blocker. So no matter how much security you want to go and fix in the goodness of your heart, as an engineering leader, you know that it's a thankless job, right?
Yeah.
First of all, it never ends. You'll always find some other issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, it's kind of portrayed as, unfortunately, a net negative that, oh my God, bad security means bad posture, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And thirdly, you'll have all your teams, engineering teams, basically push back at you that, hey, how come none of this stuff is counting towards my incentive? I mean, the only person, Ayub, that I know who took security seriously was Bill Gates. So I forget which Windows version it was, but basically at some point they got embarrassed about the number of bugs that were being discovered. So they put the whole company on pause for, I don't know, a few weeks or a month or something. And the whole idea was just fix security.
Wow.
Only fix security, right? And if I as an engineering leader have to do all of these things to build our product, and oh, by the way, I'm getting pulled back into this thankless thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, imagine the heartburn it's going to cause when, it's easier to hold grudges against the messenger, the GRC messenger, instead of actually fixing things, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I really think that's where I think it leads to something interesting around like, there's like how central now in especially SaaS companies, how central the product team is, right? Because the product team, they set the direction, they set the roadmap, they kind of more or less set what the engineers are going to be working on for the upcoming future. And I think often, like at the top, you have often the product managers, like almost little CEOs of the specific feature they're managing. But then us sometimes we go so down, right? So specific backend engineer or a specific infrastructure engineer, and we request from them like help on the security matter. But in the end, they don't actually make a lot of their priorities. It's set way higher up, and then we don't understand why security is not prioritized. But I think if we need to win the struggle, it has to be won at the product leadership level. Because if you have like a specific allocated time slot for non-functional requirements, potentially security, and you can have that embedded into each sprint, then like what you need to be done might get at least a little bit of priority because they can allocate time specifically for that. But if they're already super busy, they're already 110%, and you need them to go 150 because you have those security things to fix, then it's not sustainable anyway, because they might do it once. But if you come every week with the same request, then it won't go very far.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So to kind of lead to this, how in your own words, would you define GRC engineering? I think in your context, like if you want to specifically potentially define compliance engineering, that could be also interesting to me.
Yeah. So again, I'll give you like a three-dimensional approach. So I'm taking this GRC horizontal and kind of flipping it vertical, right? So I'm going to talk a bit about compliance and then risk and then governance, right? I feel kind of starting from the very top, the governance and the risk management parts of it. Considering the threats that we deal with at scale, the engineering around governance and risk management is more so around aligning to the threat activities and marrying it up to the known posture that we have in the company. So let's say, you're an API-based SaaS company, right? Your business is, fintech, shopping, whatever it is, right? You're kind of providing APIs to the company, right? Understanding what the threats are out there and using like engineering/automation approaches to make sure that you are able to represent risk and thereby govern on it in a very efficient, very scalable manner. The example I give is, so I used to be this Star Trek fan, right?
Yeah.
So as Star Trek, when you kind of approach this new civilization, this new ship, you're the Enterprise, you approach this new ship, and you don't know if it should be shields up, red alert, or it should be let's kind of roll out the carpet and welcome this new entity into the Federation, right? So this ability to very quickly judge what the risk is, what should I do about it, right? And then on the compliance engineering part of it, anything that we can do to bake in quality control/compliance from the get-go, which would mean that A, we are solving for technical debt, and B, we are not acquiring any new compliance type debt, right? I think that's a good way to kind of approach this. Also, talent has become very expensive, very validly so. People are solving some very interesting problems, right? And think about this: if you're an engineer at OpenAI, right, and you're kind of like literally kind of changing the world, do you want to spend your time personally as a person? Do you want to spend your time building out interesting product, or do you want to spend time with the GRC team creating screenshots, right? So any engineering activities we can do to ideally automate it, so you don't even go from compliance to non-compliance, or at least automate the workflows of compliance, so you don't have to be pulled away from your day-to-day jobs. I think that's where compliance engineering can really shine.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I really think it's a bit challenging when you work on very interesting potentially, as you said, like world-changing projects, and then you get put into this very mundane and potentially in some context, like you feel like potentially useless or very like has low value activity. But like from what you just said, so if I'm an engineer, what would you say are some of the things I could do as a GRC practitioner to make like the engineer's job easier, or like to better fit? Because I like what you said about quality control. I think it relates a bit like QA in the development life cycle, where it's necessary to have that step, and it embeds it where it's always tested, so it has this baseline that is always met. Is it like a similar approach that you want for compliance?
Yes, I'm going to give you like a 30-second like geeky answer. You asked me as an engineer, so I'll give you as an engineer, right? So if you analyze like most compliance frameworks, right, there are kind of 3 or 4 buckets or themes that come up, like no matter what the framework is, right? You have access management, right? You have change management. You have threat and vulnerability management. And ultimately, this kind of leads into configuration drift, right? Okay, how standardized is your configuration? How much drift do you have, right? Now, as an engineer, instead of solving for this after the fact, my onus would be that, hey, what can I do to reduce the target on my back so the auditors don't come after me at all, right? So what I mean by that is access management, right? What if, and let's just say I'm on an AWS instance, right? So what if instead of having humans to have the ability to log into AWS, I have a standardized set of system controls that can log into AWS and perform change management on my behalf, right? So then suddenly all of these human issues kind of go away, right? For change management, what if I have this change bot that implements this business logic? That, hey, here are these, low risk changes, medium risk changes, oh my God, stop and look at this before you implement changes, right? And the change bot is basically responsible for either kicking it back to me that, hey, this one requires a manual review, or this one, you can push it as is, right? So change management is pushed out as well, right? Configuration drift, again, we have standardized, images and everything available right now. We have infrastructure as code.
Yep.
What if we had the ability that in our DevOps pipeline, we have this kind of checks and balances that if somebody tries to push out a non-compliant workload, and a non-compliant workload may be something that you're using an outdated, Docker container or whatever, it won't get pushed out at all. The CI/CD pipeline will, push back on it. Hey, buddy, you need to update your Docker image, or whatever it is right now. You're trying to push out an unencrypted S3 bucket or whatever it is, right? Go and fix that, and then push it out again. And suddenly you end up in a scenario where you aren't even able to introduce non-compliance into your environment, right? That's how I would think about it as an engineer.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I think potentially something that might be challenging is like often companies have like varying levels of maturity, let's say around DevOps, and sometimes it's a bit tougher to have hard stops, in your pipeline. So let's say I'm running a pipeline. Let's say like it's a Terraform plan, and I want to check if the infrastructure as code plan is compliant. If I fail and then it get rejected, sometimes some people would say like in my specific use case and go through a lot of exceptions. And I see often with even with like initiatives around policy as code, that's also this thing of like, do you actually just need to like request a violation to be recorded somewhere? Or do you actually want this to be like a hard stop? And I think like often you need like a spectrum, starting potentially with just like violations being recorded. And then when it gets to a critical volume, then you can make the case that in this instance, like we should probably have that as a hard stop because of the potential liabilities and vulnerabilities we're getting into our production environment.
So you talked about policy as code. If I may, I have a quick 15-second, a
Of
rant
course.
about that
Yeah.
as well. So I'm going to take my engineering hat off and put my GRC practitioner hat on, right?
Yes.
I feel like we as GRC practitioners introduce a lot of potential jeopardy in our company by writing policies and standards that are way more rigorous than what the company is performing right now. So, I mean, leave aside standards like PCI, which is a very kind of like unambiguous standard, right? Most of the standards, most of the compliance frameworks, give you best practices that, hey, complexity of passwords or whatever it is, right? I feel like there is this disconnect between the GRC practitioners and the engineering teams in what we are communicating as intent via the policy set vis-a-vis what is actually being executed by engineering, right? So to me, policy as code would be something where you maintain the policy set as machine readable code in GitHub or something, right? So I, as an engineer, can take something and implement the right control for it. So let's say your policy says today that, hey, you shall have 9 characters alphanumeric, right? As an engineer, I can go do that. Tomorrow, when I update my environments and I say that, hey, now I can support like 12 characters and multi-factor authentication, it should be able to go back the other way too, where you have this kind of policy as code, and you can now update the standards and the procedures. Hopefully, your policy set stays static, but the standards and the procedures get updated. So you're not introducing any new jeopardy in the environment where the regulators or the auditors come in and say that, hey, you said you're doing this. This is you saying it.
Yeah.
And you're not actually doing the stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. I think there is always this massive disconnect between the policies and how it's practiced. And I think it's probably a very good idea to have this distinction between like policies, standards, guidelines, and having like different tiers to make sure that policies, they're not getting into too much detail. So you're not introducing all this, and you keep all those details for standards and guidelines that are more operational in nature and can be like more specific to each vertical, instead of having everything in one main policy and half of it is not practiced, or people find workarounds and stuff, and you can have some issues, especially during audits, if they check for some of these controls.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So in terms of the potential, so we spoke about the potential issues. So how you spoke about that a little bit, but like if we get into a bit more detail, how like this more engineering mindset into how we do GRC, how it would solve some of the major issues, especially like we talked about compliance as the be all end all, right? Like how having a more engineering approach to this would allow us to move like above and go above and beyond just like the baseline of ISO or SOC 2.
Yeah. The good thing is that most of the engineering tooling is already out there. Most of the engineering practices using this tooling is already being put in place. So what I'm going to suggest, none of that is net new, and there should not be any resistance from the engineering teams that, hey, now we have to go do this net new thing that we haven't done before, right? So the first part I would like to suggest is that we should, just like what we have around continuous observability for our business processes, our infrastructure, so that data dogs of the world, right? As an engineering leader, you have a lot of like continuous observability, right? On the spikes or the thrashes or whatever is failing in your engineering environment, right? Why not have something similar for compliance as well? What usually happens is either there is some month-end activity or some quarter-end activity where internal audit or external audit comes in, and it's all after the fact, right? Why not build something where you can kind of start driving accountability from the get-go, right? And the way you kind of drive accountability is you kind of build awareness, right? So the whole continuous observability part of it, have continuous compliance observability, right? Secondly, I feel like the existing tooling needs to become more specific. So like if you use any cloud security posture management tooling, CSPM tooling, they're like, oh, implement all of this security and you'll get some TBD compliance as part of it. Be a bit more specific. Okay, what exactly is it solving for a compliance perspective, right? Similarly, if you're using some GRC automation tooling, yes, you're really automating the compliance business workflows where you can now go and upload your insurance policy or whatever it is, right? It pulls in some artifacts automatically. But in the end, what it does is it creates those 10,000 service tickets that engineering still needs to go and solve for, right? So start putting some context around it that, hey, what's important, what's first, what's second, what's third, right? I think that is missing as well, right? And then my final point, like I said earlier, whatever we can do to kind of prevent compliance debt from even happening at all.
Yeah.
Having no problem is better than, solving a problem. So whatever we can do to kind of, put proactive guardrails in place, I think would be a big help.
No, definitely. Yeah, I like those 3 points. So around, you compare a bit to Datadog and like continuous observability. Like, so let's say I'm a small company, right? Like, for me, GRC is I need SOC 2 and ISO to sell more, right?
Yeah.
It's very commercial based. It's very driven by sales. So how can it get from this stage where for me compliance is an actual like sales enablement activity to compliance as like a security enhancing activity? Like how would I sell this? Because like potentially it would require additional headcount or new skills from my team. So how can I move towards this more continuous approach? Because if you think about it, I only need to showcase this once or twice a year. Like, what would I know how these controls are operating across the year if ISO only checks for it once?
Yeah. No, that's a very, very, it sounds like a very simple question, but it's actually a very profound, complex question, right? I got lucky in my earlier days when I was at Motorola because a data breach had happened, right? And I don't know if you know this about Motorola, but we used to basically consider our own internal network as untrusted. And that's where the whole zero trust architecture actually, came to be, right?
Interesting. Okay.
So my point is that sorry, I just lost my train of thought over here. Say your question one more time, and I'll get back what I was trying to get to.
Yeah, my question was around like how can you make GRC more continuous activity instead of something that you do like once a year for like specific audits? How can you move?
Yeah. So the best way to kind of do this, in my opinion, is make sure you're actually aligned to the revenue generation activities. Yes, it's very hard to make a strong case to executive leadership if you go with just the head count and the tooling and the capex and whatever, right? But instead, if you are, if you're friends with the sales team, for example, that hey, how many inquiries are you getting today, where they're asking for our SOC 2 reports or SOC 2 attestations or our ISO 27001 certifications, right? And suddenly it becomes that hey, for us to be able to have a leg up on our competition, or us to be able to differentiate ourselves, this is something we absolutely need to have. So then it kind of starts getting presented in the context of business enablement.
Yeah.
And not that, hey, here's another cost center that we now need to manage for, right? So yeah. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
No, it answered partly because I understand what you mean. So because you position it as a way to like enable more sales, then like you get a lot more backing, especially from the sales org, which has a lot of power in any organization. But like what I wanted to learn to get from you is like after we got those certifications and like GRC is embedded and they have their activity set up for like, let's say a yearly or bi-yearly audits. If I want to move above that and get towards like an area where compliance is a bit more than just like protecting our baseline, how can I move towards this and how can I like sell it internally?
Okay, so I'm not sure how much time we have. I'll give you another quick example, right?
Yeah.
So I was a consultant. The situation was that there was this heavy equipment manufacturer, which was looking to basically open up repair depots around the world, right? And the situation is that I'm on another project. I'm sitting in China. It's night my time. You know, this board is meeting earlier in the day back in the US, right? So I put up my presentation remotely, right? And I go over the second slide, and the chairman of the board says, "Thanks, Vic. I think we get it, right?" So we were like one of like I think 5 or 6 competitors bidding for this multi-million-dollar project, right? And to be shut off with no context, there's no Zoom at that point, so I can't see anybody. And I come back, and it turns out that we actually not only did we get the project got expanded out in scope and budget. So I asked this guy, I'm like, Gary, first of all, awesome. Thank you so much. But can you please walk me through what did we do differently?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And he's like, everybody else kind of came in and talked about like intellectual property protection and, all the best practices and, the data leakage, the schematics leakage and whatever. You are the only one who had this graphic that represented in terms of bulldozers that if your production line went down over this much time, here is the number of bulldozers that would get impacted. This is how your production line would slow down, right?
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm thinking, Ayub, that's like one of the stupidest graphics that you could have, like 3.5 bulldozers, right? But the sense it made to the board that we kind of have this visceral reaction now. We understand it, right? That hey, if this bad thing was to happen, here's how it would impact the business, right? So I feel like compliance should not be like the be all do all. At some point, compliance should evolve into this. I keep coming back to quality control, into this quality control signal that hey, here is how we are safely enabling the business to succeed.
Yeah.
Right. It isn't all doom and gloom, but yes, there are good people out there. There are bad people out there. Here is how we can help you manage the business risk in case your infrastructure goes down, in case your reputation takes a risk, in case the auditors come in, right? Whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel we haven't kind of evolved or scaled up to that yet.
Yeah, definitely agree. So on this topic, I wanted to ask you, just because I think you're in a good position to answer this. Like, if I want to move more towards this, right? More towards this, we really talked about it a couple of times, this quality control function. Like, how can I make the right decision between building something in-house, potentially getting the right skills, and trying to find something on the market, so potentially buying a tool that will help me towards this journey? How would you say like are some things I should keep in mind when I'm trying to make that decision?
That's a very good question. I mean, my answer, if you'd asked me this maybe a couple of years ago, I would have said that build something internally because it forces you to learn more about the business. It forces you to interact more with other teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you're an APIs company, what kind of APIs do you offer? What are the threats to those APIs? Are all APIs equally important, right? It would have forced you to do that, right? But lately, I would say my position has changed that maybe there is value to at least getting in some outside tooling first, just because there is so much at play here. There is so much noise. There is so little signal to noise. There is so much jeopardy that is being introduced to CISOs now, right? We need to kind of start getting some handle on it pretty quickly, So we can then figure out, we can then triage, right? Okay, what are the key problems to solve? Because if we don't have the right credibility as security practitioners, right, as CSOs, if we don't have the right credibility, if we don't know what are the right problems to solve, it's not going to matter very soon. So my position is going to evolve into, get some external tooling that, at the very best case, helps solve some of these problems. At the very worst case, allows you to do something in an automated fashion so you can use the resources somewhere else, and take it from there then, right?
Okay, yeah, I understand. I understand the thing. So if I get what you said right, you would say that a good thing about buying would potentially be like at least you have a leg up, right? There's a way to make sense of all the noise, and at least you have like a tool that is purposely built to help you get through some of the first hurdles and already have a little bit of information that leadership can use a bit quicker than potentially like something that you have to build in house. You have to tune it a little bit more, and potentially you have to do a lot of try and error up to the point where you can get something that is a working solution that actually is helpful. So if we think about buying, what would you say? So of course, there's the compliance automation space that has been, pretty had lots of the major vendors. They had massive capital raises and very successful recently, and we see that there's a lot of traction around that field. I wanted to have your take on like what problems they're solving very well, and potentially some, especially for listeners that might think of going with one of these tools, like what are some of the potential blind spots or areas they might not think about, especially on the first stages, but there might be areas to keep in mind as you're trying to move towards this automation mindset and like have compliance as more as just a baseline.
Yeah. So I feel like the compliance automation term, the phrase compliance automation, is a bit misleading, in the sense it should be kind of broken down into what is kind of true compliance automation and what is kind of automation of compliance workflows, right? I feel the existing tooling does a decent job at the automation of compliance workflows, right? For the trivial pieces, now you have this kind of central repository, the central source of truth, where you can start capturing the board meeting minutes where security was discussed, your cyber insurance policy, all the good stuff. So you don't have to kind of go chase after 10 different people to build out this packet, right? I feel like the limitation to your point is that these tools kind of stop at the true kind of compliance automation activities, right? So what I mean is, as an engineering leader, yes, you have helped me enough that now my team doesn't have to provide you stupid screenshots anymore, because the tool can go in and collect the evidence automatically, right? But at the same time, for all the issues that have now surfaced, that hey, here are the 20,000 things you need to go and fix, the current set of GRC automation tooling does not do that. But I feel like, and again, we're not naming any names here, but I feel like the current vendors need to be a bit more upfront and articulate about that. That hey guys, as a GRC professional, if you're a GRC professional, this tool will definitely make your life easier because you don't have to go chase after people, right? But as an engineering leader, this tool is not going to help you at all. These issues still need to be fixed. There is no auto magic, button that gets pushed now where all the compliance issues actually go away, right? So I feel that's some of the, I wouldn't call it a limitation. I mean, again, like I said, technologies are coming online, but we do need to kind of evolve into this next generation of maturity, right? So
yeah. I think like those tools, I think they're solving the compliance team's problems, but not potentially the externalities that are coming from solving those problems, right? I think it helps the GRC team like spend less time on like walkthroughs and all these activities. But then like if you get a lot more data and you get a lot more like alerts coming through because you're monitoring your environment in a more like real-time way. But then, as you said, I think it's a very good point. Like what happens next is like the infrastructure team has 100,000 stuff to check out. And then on this front, it doesn't directly help the compliance team because it's a completely different team that has to handle this. And then in this case, like, managed via Jira tickets, so I don't know, whatever you use to manage your issues and the way your service desk. And I think then it doesn't help towards like the remediation part, which is the next step. So on that front, I wanted you to talk to us a bit about like what you're doing with Compliance Foundry, because I think you're kind of positioning yourself like after this kind of first step and more towards like a more real-time approach to remediation.
Yeah. So the joke I kind of make a bit facetiously is, so I love auditors. I hate audits, right? I've been in kind of highly scrutinized environments all my life, right? Facebook, Motorola, DocuSign, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my kind of frustration as an engineer, as a leader, with the current set of tooling was that we have automated the bureaucracy elements of it, right? But we have not solved for the root cause analysis, right? We still end up, with the 10,000 tickets or whatever that need to be solved for, right? Yeah. So what I'm doing is building out this, compliance engineering automation company. It's called Compliance Foundry, right? It's basically a 4-part approach. The first part is around detection, right? So detect the compliance violations in real time, have the continuous compliance observability, have the drift detection that, hey, I was compliant yesterday and I'm showing us non-compliant today, or, I'm showing us non-compliant in the next few hours. What changed? So it's a lot easier to go after the person and say, hey, buddy, can you please not do this? Instead of, getting caught, 6 months after the fact, where people have kind of moved on to the next thing, right? That's the first part of it. The second part is, at least in the cloud for the technical controls, it is getting easier to automatically kind of correct the compliance violations, right? Now, again, the caveat is that not all companies have mature DevOps practices, not all companies have, mature reliability engineering practices, right? But again, that is a function of compliance as well, that, hey, figure out, how mature or non-mature your processes are, right? So it is a journey, right? But the second part is, kind of automatically kind of fixing the compliance violations. And that's where my whole automated SOC 2 in AWS comes in, right? The third part is kind of putting in the right guardrails. So you can't introduce new non-compliance into your environment, right? So you have this whole, prevent future compliance violations, right? And the fourth part is the reporting. So again, when I was at Meta FinTech, we were trying to do this whole Novi thing over the globe all at once. And it turns out that, again, most regulators, most auditors have the same kind of questions, right? But they have a unique spin on it. So creating the reporting still was a very manual exercise. Even the TPRM stuff, right? You have to fill up this, ridiculous 200-line spreadsheet, right?
Yes.
So what if there was a way where you could have, this real-time, no-code, customizable reporting, right? Instead of having this kind of static kind of point-in-time reports. So if I, as an auditor, want to see how compliant or non-compliant my customer is, as of right now, let's publish this report out as an API. And you can see in real time, right? Now, I, as a GRC employee, can go and, manually drag and drop the reporting dashboard to align with whichever way they have this question structured. Mm-hmm. It's like once and done, right? Yeah. I don't have to worry about filling up spreadsheets. My sales guys are happy that, hey, I don't have to fill up any new questionnaire, right? I'm being thought of as an industry leader that, hey, these guys are proactively thinking about this stuff. So that's the whole 4-point approach I'm trying to build out via, compliance engineering in my startup.
No, that's a lot of it sounds like, the perfect end goal, right? If we have this, then we'll solve compliance.
Oh man, it comes from a position of a lot of pain. I mean, again, I've just like you, I've gone through a lot of regulators, auditors, whatever, right? So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
No, that's very good. One last question I wanted to ask you is, if you had a magic wand, okay, and you could solve one problem in GRC, like what would you pick? You have to only choose one, but potentially, if you choose one and it kind of cascades into solving all the other ones, then that's also good.
So I'm gonna pick up a non-technical problem, and
Okay.
this may sound a bit facetious, but I'll explain why I give you the answer I'm gonna give you. I would wish that GRC and technical people would be friends. And the reason I say that is because there is so much silos. I mean, again, I've been on both sides of the fence. We all know people, we have friends in the space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody comes from a good place. They have the right activities in the heart. But people I talk to, no matter if it's engineering, no matter if it's GRC, they're all so burned out. I mean, it's bad, dude. It's bad, right? So if there was a way where I could, wave this wand and suddenly, we are this kind of good, tight family, that's what I would go for, because everything else can be solved. Everything else is downstream, right?
Yeah.
But the ability to kind of align upstream, I think that's what's missing today.
Yeah, that's very true. I really think collaboration, when you actually like working with your coworkers, is a lot easier. And I think, as you said, I think it's also it's not just stemming from like each team hating the other. I don't think it's very rarely the case. I think often everyone is like very siloed, and you're just too busy to have time to do this. And I think like shadow programs and the way through which you can see the world from the other lenses, I think it really helps, and also creates actual relationships, because you have the opportunity like to be in someone else's shoes for a day or week. And I think those like kind of loan programs and stuff like this, it can really be a good way to be, because as you said, like I think that relationship, if we can patch it to an extent, I think it would help solve everything else, because then you have more context, more willingness to help. Like you probably get a lot more information as well. So it solves everything once again. So it's a good thing to choose.
So I'll sorry if I'm like taking a call over, but I'll say this as a founder, right? And I used to do this when I was a practitioner as well. Sales is hard, dude. So when I was a practitioner, I used to ask my leadership that, hey, is it okay for me to listen in on the sales calls, right? Because it gave you an idea of what the customer was asking for, how the internal teams are responding to that stuff, right? Even now as a founder, by founder-led sales, I have to go and talk to people every day, right?
Yeah.
So security truly can be a business enabler, because I mean, it's not like 10 years ago where people didn't know about security. I mean, this is top of mind for everybody. And if you can come like right off the bat and say that, hey, we have the security problem solved, and let's talk about other things, that puts you ahead of, 80-90% of your competition anyways, right? So
absolutely. Yeah, that's a good story to tell. Definitely.
Yeah.
Very, very compelling. So yeah, it was very good meeting with you. I really think we went through a lot of interesting topics. I think the focus you have on the engineering aspect is very useful, I think, as well for practitioners, because I think the way you see the problem, like it's through a more unique approach, and I think you're very good at like bridging that little gap between like, we need compliance and like we should have compliance. If you get what I mean, like it's just like, we can't do without it, to like, if we don't have it, we will actually lose on like actual business advantage and how to move towards that and like be a cornerstone of your security program. Yeah, I think you've been able to really tell that like precisely, and with a lot of a lot of stories as well, which is very helpful, to put some images on some of those concepts. So yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks a lot.
Likewise. And just one last thing, I know it's like late Friday afternoon, evening your time. So thank you so much for being so passionate about it, to have a call on a Friday evening. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
So take care.
Bye.